Happy Sabbath, everyone. Greetings. Again, my name is Carin Lynch, and my husband Ron and Ron is on the meeting, I believe, but I don't see him in my view up here, but I believe he's on there somewhere. And we are the North American Division Directors for Light Ministry. Light, as the pastor was telling you, is a ministry that ministers all over the world, teaching about health, teaching people to be able to use health to reach people for the gospel with the gospel message. LIGHT stands for the Lay Institute for Global Health Training. So today I will be presenting a shorter presentation, like the pastor said, and it's talking about how we can build our immune system to not only fight COVID, because obviously that is a focus in this world today, but also how we can resist other disease as well. So we're going to go through a presentation, probably about 45 minutes or so. And then I believe there's a short break, and then Ron will be able to present his program, which is talking about 3 of the biggest diseases we have in this world today: heart disease, diabetes, and hypertension. So those will be the topics for today. And without further ado, I guess I will be able to start my presentation, but I'm going to start with a word of prayer. So if you don't mind bowing your heads, I will pray. Gracious Heavenly Father, as always, we thank you, and we are so blessed, Lord, to know you and to be able to use the simple things that you have given us here in this world to defeat these things that are all among us, like disease. Lord, there's a pandemic going on around the world, but Lord, there is so much more with different diseases that are hitting homes and hitting populations of people, Lord, and we just want to be our best for you, Lord, and to be a living example of your kindness. And we thank you and praise you, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, so I think I have to share my screen here. So let me share screen. All right, just. Can you see me? I can't see you, so I have.
We can see you fine.
Can you see my presentation?
No.
No.
All right, that's what I got to figure out. So if you just give me a moment here. I did this last time with you, so I know how to do it. Let's try to get this going here. I might have to call in reinforcements from Ron in a minute if I can't get this up.
There.
Now it's working, right?
Right, yeah.
It is.
Oh, praise the Lord. See, God is good, right? All the time. All right, thank you for your patience. I'm much better in person than I am on the computer. How's that? All right, so let me just. Hide the thumbnails. All right, so as we are boosting our immune system and defeating COVID-19. So we understand that COVID-19 has affected us all. There's been many discussions around the world focusing on the scenarios of millions of people with this disease. And people are anxious, they're frightened, but we need to know what we can do to take precautions to not only protect ourselves, but obviously protect others from, transmitting this disease, but also building our immune system in case, not only to avoid the disease, but in case we succumb to getting this virus, how can we recover in our best way? So I just want to begin talking about our immune system and getting to understand a little bit about how God has made us and how it works. So the immune system is way more advanced than most people actually, understand. It's better than like the best military forces in our world. It's equipped with tons of mobile little soldiers in our bloodstream. It's like an arsenal of deadly weapons. It has a sophisticated chemical communication network. These little defenders, must be on duty like every minute of every hour of every day in order to detect and then destroy the enemies of our body. So even one surviving bacteria, virus, or even a cancer cell could potentially be life-threatening for us. So 1 out of every 100,000 cells belongs to the body's armed forces. It's an army totaling 1 trillion white blood cells. But 1 trillion white blood cells only makes up about 1% of the total blood volume in a regular healthy adult. Some of these little foot soldiers are the phagocytes. Now the phagocytes are the Army's foot soldiers, like I said. The first ones, they arrive on the battlefield when they see something's going on. What they do is they engulf the invader. They get around it, and these little germs will start to dissolve because they will basically use powerful enzymes to kind of destroy and dissolve these invading little germs. So then there's the lymphocytes. Now the lymphocytes perform other important tasks. Some of the lymphocytes destroy the virus. They're like natural killer cells. They carry weapons and they basically destroy the viruses or the infection. Also, there's other lymphocytes that target things like cancer cells, while others produce highly specialized weapons called the antibodies in our body. Now, the immune system is designed to protect the body from disease, but if it is weakened in any way, we're more likely to get sick. So let's talk a little bit about some of the practical things we can do. And we're going to focus now more so on COVID-19 specifically. But I guess these precautions we could use obviously in all areas of our, of our life to protect us from disease. So the first is we can wash our hands. Wash our hands with soap and water from 20 to 30 seconds. Now, I remember somebody telling me a great way to make sure you've done it long enough is while you're washing your hands, recite the Lord's Prayer. So you get a little prayer in, and you also make sure that you get your 20 to 30 seconds in. This is probably the single most important thing we can do to prevent the infection and the spread of COVID-19. The second one, don't touch your face. This is a hard one for me because I'm always moving my hair, itching my nose, all these things. So you really have to be conscious about it. We don't realize how much we touch our face, but researchers tell us that we touch our face up to 23 times per hour. I can believe that because I know me. It's definitely something we want to avoid, especially during this time. Coughing and sneezing thoughtfully. Now, the coronavirus is transmitted through respiratory droplets. So the cough or the sneeze, is going to spread this. If we are not masked, and again, I know there's a lot of controversy about wearing masks, not wearing masks and things like that. I don't know if masks are 100% protective. Obviously, we don't know if it actually is protecting us or not, but we want to do the most we can. But if you are going to cough or sneeze, even if you have a mask on, sneeze or cough into your sleeve or not into your hands, because obviously then we're touching things again. But we don't want to, again, pass this on if by chance we may have COVID-19. We could be asymptomatic, meaning that we don't have any symptoms of it. Also, since the virus can be transmitted through the air, it's wise to keep your distance. They've implemented social distancing. I'm sure in Canada, as well as in the United States, we have this 6 feet, from other people, and keep your space basically. And that's what they're suggesting. So we're looking out for each other by keeping our distance. It's hard for people like me who are huggers and want to say hello to people. It's been difficult, but I've been making sure that I am taking care of things and not being too close to people, especially because we don't want to contract it, obviously, or we don't want to give it to somebody if we by chance have it. So implementing, again, social distancing about 6 feet. So how can we strengthen our immune system? And this is really what we really want to talk about today. Those were some precautions and the beginning telling us a little bit about the immune system, but now how can we strengthen our immune system? So let's go ahead into some of these things that will be, most beneficial for us for all disease, not just COVID-19. Eating a high fiber diet. A high fiber diet blunts harmful excessive immune responses in the lungs. At the same time, a high fiber diet boosts antiviral immunities by activating the killer T cells. Soluble fiber helps our immune system fight inflammation, which helps prevent disease and also speeds our recovery. So we should enjoy things like beans or oats, oat bran, rice bran, barley, citrus fruits would be good, apples, strawberries, peas, potatoes, things like that. This is soluble fiber. Greens, this is kale there, right there. And cruciferous vegetables such as broccoli and cabbage and cauliflower and things like that are especially useful for boosting immunity in the gut and the skin. It turns out that green vegetables, things from bok choy to broccoli, are the source of chemical signals that are important to a fully functioning immune system. They do this by ensuring that the immune cells in the gut and the skin, known as intraepithelial lymphocytes, function properly. And then here's cruciferous vegetables, like I said, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, green beans, things like that. Very important in improving and boosting our immune system. Of course, berries, we've heard they're excellent immune boosters because they're high in antioxidants. And eating onions and garlic. Now, onions and garlic increases the natural killer cells and the activity in our bloodstream and helps to inhibit inflammation in our body. If you know anything about disease, any disease, where we're talking about the common cold, all the way up to something as serious as cancer, disease is inflammation in our body. So onions and garlic, shallots, things like that are helpful in bringing down the inflammation in our body. Some immune enhancers. We have natural foods that contain an abundance of vitamins and minerals. We want to eat things that are high in vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin E, just powerful antioxidants and immune boosters. For a healthy immune system, we also have to remember that the body needs some essential fats. Now, the body cannot manufacture fats in the body, so they must take them from foods, and we want to take them from nutritious foods. So let's talk a little bit about omega-3 fats. It's a class of friendly fats, and these are some of the things that we can get omega-3 fats in. Flaxseed, chia seed, walnuts, green beans, spinach. Believe it or not, these not only empower the immune system, but they're cancer-killing forces. So looking at it from another disease standpoint, we see that it helps to inhibit cancer cell growth. So these are the good, healthy fats. And again, you saw that these are all whole grains, whole seeds, walnuts, things of that nature have have omega-3 fatty acids. On the other hand, though, if we look at this, diets that include the regular use of processed or refined fats and oils kind of dispel the cancer-fighting forces and promote the growth and spread of cancer cells. So these should be avoided. They actually say that some studies suggest that reducing your fat intake from about 22 to 25% of your total diet can improve the viral fighting protection of the immune cells. So having a lower fat diet, especially during this time of pandemic, where this can help fight the viruses, is a really important thing to consider. But what about sugar? Now, sugar is another thing that we need to consider when we're talking about our immune system. Refined sugar, like refined fats, are basically the arch enemy of our immune system. Sugar quickly inactivates the germ-killing foot soldiers, or the phagocytes. So, for example, and there's a thing of soda there. In one study, they talked about the sugar and the effects of sugar on the white blood cells. Just one soft drink. So we're going to say about a can of soda is about 12 ounces. It contains 12 teaspoons of sugar. That's enough sugar to weaken the protective ability of our body's white blood cells by 60% for 5 hours. So that means that when if we drank a soda that was with refined sugar in it, That means for the next 5 hours, our immune system has reduced by 60%. Imagine that if you had to go out into the army and you're fighting the enemy, but for 5 hours, you had to only be at 40% of your people. That is a huge, huge reduction of your forces, isn't it? Let's talk a little bit now about exercise. Exercise neutralizes the harmful effects of stress by stimulating the release of natural feel-good chemicals called endorphins. We've heard about endorphins. Those are the things that will put us in that great mood. Stress is especially counteracted when exercise is combined with the immune system allies, the fresh air and the sunlight. So when you're exercising, the best time to go out and exercise is during during the day in the sunshine. I mean, when the sun is shining. I shouldn't say it doesn't have to be the middle of the day, but getting that beautiful vitamin D and that good sunlight, but also breathing in fresh air. Now, of course, sometimes we live in places that it might be very rainy or the winter is very harsh. So you still need to exercise. So you should get as much exercise as you can in, but optimally being outside in those elements is going to be our best bet. So clean, fresh outdoor air inhibits cancer growth, believe it or not. It helps correct allergic disorders such as asthma and hay fever. Fresh air also aids in protecting the immune forces from the devastating effects of stress. Pure water is another vital ingredient for a healthy immune system. Water is a potent detoxifying agent to our body. It flushes germs out and other pollutants in our body. I'd like to take a couple minutes and talk about a powerful treatment that was used during the 1918 flu pandemic, and it saved thousands of lives. It's called fomentations. Now, if you remember, we had a pandemic back in 1918 that it killed many, many people all across this world. But we have a lot of statistics in the United States about the death tolls. However, there was a treatment that was being used called fomentations, and this is a natural health treatment and something that's still used today people who use hydrotherapy or water therapy as treatment. So let me talk a little bit about what a fomentation is. Well, a fomentation is a topical application in which like you're taking a hot cloth and you apply it to the body. It's kind of like a compress if you were putting a compress on, but compresses are usually applied and then they're left on there to cool. With a fomentation, we're actually going to leave it and keep it as hot as possible for a period of time. And then we're going to exchange it and continue with hot fomentations. So it's a little different than a compress. In fact, in a fomentation, we normally would do just say 5 minutes of hot with 30 seconds of ice cold in that area that you're treating. So I have here why it works and what it's used for. So I wanted you to kind of read it as well as I read along with me so that you can kind of understand. Why does a fomentation work? Well, the application of heat to the skin draws the blood to the surface and away from the internal organs. So heat relaxes the muscle and decreases pain and inflammation. So where increased blood flow to that area stimulates white blood cell reproduction and action. The sweating caused by the heat increases your body's ability to eliminate body waste, toxins, and things like that in the system. So the treatment actually calms and soothes the nerves as well. So that's why it helps. And this is what we can use it for, not just when we're talking about, the pandemic, but it's very interesting. In fact, before I go on, I'd like to share with you that I was watching a symposium on health regarding COVID-19. And there's a doctor right here, Wildwood, as Pastor said, is in Georgia in the United States. However, we are 15 minutes away from Chattanooga, Tennessee, which is the next state north of us. And in Chattanooga, there's a doctor who has been using fomentations in treating patients that have gone severe enough to be where they require a ventilator. I don't know the statistics on the outcome, but I do know they're using fomentations or hydrotherapy to treat COVID patients, at least in this area, and they're doing it in a trial. They were doing it in a trial basis at this point. So we can use it for chest congestion, colds, flu, bronchitis, pneumonia, asthma, pleurisy. It heals and improves the function of the internal organs, neuralgia, which is the painful nerves, and then painful muscles and joints due to back injury and arthritis. So these are a couple of the things that you can do a fomentation for. Also difficulty sleeping, nervousness, detoxifying liver or kidneys, or warming a body part in preparation for other treatments. Talking about water, we also need to drink lots of pure, fresh water. The bloodstream, which is the highway to transporting the immune system's troops, is kept flowing freely by adequate amounts of water. In addition, the mucous membranes in our body, especially in the nose and the mouth, also need plenty of water to maintain a protective barrier against invading germs. We need to stay hydrated. All right, sunshine. Sunshine, did you know that actually the sun's ultraviolet rays kill germs? They're actually the best germicide. We need to get out in the sun as much as possible. Sunshine actually increases the production and the activity of the white blood cells. It strengthens our internal forces. So moderate exposure to the sunshine also strengthens the skin, which is a powerful barrier against these invading organisms. So it's amazing that people back in, I would say in the 1800s, doctors, when people were sick, and actually it's kind of what I've heard a little bit about with COVID too, doctors would basically say, you need to go home, shut your windows, close your doors, and stay inside until you get better. Not realizing that sunshine is actually a germicide and will kill germs. You know, I find it interesting that even, especially here in the United States, we hear that if you have COVID or you think you have COVID, you need to, if you're not to the point of respiratory distress, they send you home and they tell you to stay inside. But we understand that sunshine is a germicide. So if we can get out and breathe that fresh air and get in the sun, we are going to recover so much quicker. Let's talk a little bit about rest. Now, rest plays a huge role in our immune function. The hours of deep sleep that we get before midnight, if we use midnight as the point, anything before midnight is the prime time that our body repairs and replaces the worn out cells and tissue. So during this period, the body works at its best to restore more rapidly it'll restore things and actually replace new white blood cells. So very important to get proper rest. You know, it's very easy for us to try to stay up late doing things, busy lives, but the fact of the matter is we need to make sure we're getting proper rest so our body can repair and recover. When our regular sleep hours are disturbed, there's actually a price to pay. It's not surprising that irregular working hours are associated with a greater risk of colds and flus, serious illness, and even shortened life expectancies. People that work shift work actually tend to get sicker than other people because they're on an irregular schedule. My sister was a nurse, or she still is a nurse. I shouldn't say she was a nurse, but she was a nurse that worked midnights for many years. So she used to have to go home and force herself to sleep. But on her days off, when she needed to get things accomplished, she needed to force herself to stay awake. So she was always on that odd schedule. It is very, very hard for our body to get proper rest when we're on a crazy schedule like that. Of course, you know, we need people to care for others, and we need different jobs that obviously are shift work. But the fact of the matter is the more you can stay on a regular, good schedule of sleep, the better or less of a risk you have of not only getting sick, but also having a long, healthy life. All right, abstinence. We need to talk a little bit about things that we need to avoid. Things that we especially need to avoid when we're talking about our immune system. We talked about sugar, by the way, and we already talked about fats and refined fats and high fat foods, but these are some things that are outside of nutrition. Alcohol, tobacco, and caffeine. These are all detrimental to our body's defenses. Alcohol. First, it cripples the body's internal army. The suppression of the immune system is seen even with moderate amounts of alcohol. Its use increases the risk of disease such as tuberculosis, viral hepatitis, cancer, and AIDS. Tobacco also contains harmful chemicals that immobilizes the immune forces and stimulates the development of cancer. The large airways contain cilia in our lungs, which is a special like hair-like tiny cells that sweep germs and injurious particles out of our lungs. The tissue in the lungs is very, very delicate. So tobacco smoke paralyzes the protective cilia so that the germs and particles easily enter the lungs and can cause serious damage. Then we can talk a little bit about drugs, and obviously illicit drugs should be avoided at all times. There's many harmful effects on the body's soldiers and also lowers the defenses through their impact upon our mind. People under the influence of mind-altering substances aren't very careful in preventing serious infections like hepatitis and AIDS. We obviously may use many times people who are using drugs of such nature, their guards and their senses are dulled, and they engage in risky behaviors. So this is another thing, not just physically, but also on the mind. We end up doing things under the influence of these drugs. We also know that when people feel helpless, hopeless, their bodies actually produce stress hormones and chemicals in our body. These damage the immune responses. Things like grief, anxiety, discontent, and guilt all tend to break down the life forces and invite decay and death. On the other hand, positive emotions such as gratitude, rejoicing, goodwill, helping others, trusting in God's love and care, these are health's greatest safeguards. With God on our side, we have a sure help in every kind of trouble. The love of God can replace guilt, sorrow, and anxiety with a spirit of gratitude and praise. Jesus extends the invitation to all. Come to me, all ye who are weak and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, and ye shall find rest unto your souls. And that's found in Matthew 11, verses 28 and 29. I pray that this presentation was helpful not only in the prevention and recovery of COVID, as well as many other debilitating diseases. So I ask the Lord to bless you and keep you safe. And I don't know if we're doing any questions now. So whoever's moderating, if you'd like to jump in and let me know what our next, if we're going to just prepare for Ron, or if we're going to take some questions.
Let's take some questions. There's one that was sent in earlier asking about, you spoke about sodas. And there's a question here about ginger ale and diet sodas. Are they in the same category?
Well, we're talking about the sugar. If we're talking about the sugar in a ginger ale, it would be the same. A ginger ale, a lot of times people use ginger as to soothe the stomach, especially when we have episodes of nausea. Ginger is very helpful for that, using it in a medicinal purpose. However, the sugar in the ginger ale would be the problem. The second thing, though, talking about diet sodas, I would never recommend diet soda ever. The reason being is because of the artificial, sweeteners, which are not natural to the body. There's a lot of study on that, not only in the sense of they can be cancer causing and carcinogens, but also if we're looking at it from another standpoint of obesity, the artificial sweeteners actually increase the desire for sugar. And they did studies with people who drink artificial sweeteners, sweetened drinks, and actually struggle with more obesity issues than people who actually don't. So I wouldn't recommend either, but if we're talking about the sugar, it would definitely be the regular sodas that have the sugar in them.
Thank you, Carin.
Mhm.
We'll open the floor up for the next maybe 5 minutes. Any other questions? Okay.
Hi, Carin.
Oh, who's there?
Hi, this is Michaela. Sorry, you can see me now. Just want to
Okay.
thank you again. You are always a blessing. I have a question. So you guys are directors for Light Ministry. If people would like to support this ministry, what can they do?
Well, there's a, you mean supporting in the sense of,
Financial,
or,
right.
okay. So our office is actually, our global health headquarters is actually located in Georgia. So of course we take any helpful donations are always a blessing to the ministry. For another way that is helpful to the ministry is we have a message of health to train people to take this health message to others in their community. We offer a online school that it goes through, it's basically, it's called the Essentials of Health Evangelism. This is a program that is about 125-hour online at your own pace, in your own timeline, just to be completed within a year, because that's the timeline that they give you. But somebody who is diligent doing it every day can be done in, with an hour a day can be done in 3 months. So if you're interested in learning more, that helps support the ministry as well, because obviously the tuitions and it's very, very affordable too, but everything, we are now to the point where it pretty much is all for us. We can actually put that money toward the ministry. So, because we've recorded all those classes and we've paid the fees for the school. So now that money can help support the ministry as well. So those are 2 ways you can donate. And I can get you the address for that if anybody's interested in donating, or they can always just invite us to their church and we can always help spread that message to the churches as well.
So
you can
you
give
so
us
much.
the donation link online.
Yeah, you know what, I guess I could.
You could put it out.
Go to,
because
I can tell you our website. There is a link on our website. It's called lightingtheworld.org. It's all one word, lightingtheworld.org.
Light in the world.
Yes.
ORG.
.org.
World. Okay, light in the world.
Sure. And there'll be a link on there to donate.
Okay.
I had a question. Somebody put it up in the chat and it popped up and then it just gone. Let me see here. There's somebody typed that in here. Oh, somebody put that into everybody, lightingtheworld.org. Thank you, whoever put that in. Okay, let's see here. Looking at ginger ale. Okay, somebody asked, is it better to drink warm water or cold water in general or after eating? Well, drinking water, one of the things, drinking water, I like that it says after eating, because drinking water during our meals, not only, it basically pushes, it kind of dilutes the stomach acids. So when we digest, we're not fully digesting to get that nutrients absorbed into our small intestines. So drinking with our meals isn't good. Drinking about a half hour before or about an hour after our meals is best. Now, whether it's warm water or cold water, I would say that actually temperate water, like water that is room temperature, is probably our best. Cold water is like a shock to our system, and too hot of water would be the same. So I would tell you, if you're going to drink water, room temperature is our best. But if you are a person who doesn't drink a lot of water and drinking cold water is going to help you drink, then I would tell you to drink your water a little colder. You want to drink as much water as you can during the day to stay hydrated and to make sure that, we have all that hydration for not only a defense of our immune system, but also to, for healthy skin and hair and all that.
All right, thank you so much, Carin.
Yes.
Appreciate your presentation here. A lot to chew over, a lot for us to think about. We'll take a brief interlude here, musical interlude, before Ron picks up his presentation on the other end. I'll throw it over to Darcy at this time.
Thank you. Hi, Carin.
Hello, my friends.
Hi, good to see you. Yeah, I'll pause it back because she's gonna.
Deliver the promise of God, the vilest offender who truly believes that moment from Jesus a pardon receives. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord, let the earth hear his voice. Praise the Lord, let the people rejoice. Oh, come to the Father through Jesus.
Amen.
Amen.
Our second presentation this afternoon comes to us from Ron Lynch, and here's the title of his presentation, Battling the Big Three, Diabetes, Hypertension, and Heart Disease. Brother Ron, please take it over at this time.
Right, that should be on. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today again. And Carin and I are so excited that we are being able to share in this beautiful health ministry. So without further ado, as everyone had an opportunity to get out and stretch their legs, because this is going to be a fairly long presentation, probably close to an hour and a half. So we need to make sure we don't get too stagnant and fall asleep this afternoon, and that we can get some good water and things of this nature during the presentation. So if anyone would like to kind of get started with that now would be the good time for that. Let's just open with a short word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you today for your many blessings, and we just pray that you are with us today. We know that we are living in times that are unique, Heavenly Father, and that many people are searching for answers. And so as we go through this afternoon, we just pray that if there are questions that people have, that they may be answered today. For we ask all this in the loving name of Jesus. Amen. Now, because the presentation is as long as it is, I have asked Carin, because we can't take questions during the presentation, but Carin, if you have a question, Carin may be able to field it. She's going to be on the chat. Is that correct, Carin? Okay, so she's told me that she can handle and field some of the questions on the chat. So I'm going to just go ahead now and get to my screen to share. So today we're going to be talking about the big three: hypertension, heart disease, and diabetes. And what I would like to say, hold on just 1 second. I'm going to need to close this door because I'm getting feedback from Carin's computer. Can you turn your volume down? So when I go around the world and we meet people, I have found that for most people that they don't usually have an interest in talking about health unless they're sick. Now, when they're sick, obviously that's about all that they do want to talk about. And so it's interesting because we're now in this situation with the COVID, and we have a lot of people talking about health and what they can do about it, which is usually not the normal circumstances. But, you know, I remember a story. I was sitting in a presentation, and this gentleman, who was a very wealthy businessman, told a story about one day he went in to this biologist, and he set $1 million onto his desk. And he says to him, he says, listen, my family has all but died from diabetes. And he says, you know, he says, they've just diagnosed me with diabetes. I've set this money up here because I want you to see if you can find a cure. Well, I'm going to tell you that more than likely, either you or someone that you know struggles with hypertension, heart disease, or diabetes. You see, it's almost impossible to go around and not know someone who is dealing with these issues. And I'm going to tell you that today that there's some good news. And one of those is that with disease, it is actually more of a choice than what you think that it is. And so when we're in this presentation, I want you to, oh, by the way, just for short reference, and I can't see the pastor, but we did a handout. Is the handout available, Pastor? I don't know.
It's been sent out to our members, and if anyone doesn't have it, please shoot me a private email with your a private chat text, and I can send it to you right away.
Yeah, it would be very similar to this. It's about 3 pages, and what it will do, it will follow along with the presentation if you would like to have that. So if you would like that, just ask the pastor if you don't have it. Now, one of the things that I would like to say before starting is that we are looking at health from a different perspective than most of the physicians that you will come in contact will be discussing with you. So therefore, I want you to know from the get-go, my viewpoint on this is very simple. If you're having an acute situation, then you should follow exactly what your physician has told you to do. In other words, what I'm trying to tell you in simple terms is that if your blood pressure is so high that you're going to have a stroke, you need to get medication for that. This is not something to replace an acute situation. This is what we're talking about today is going to be dealing on lifestyle. And so therefore, it should be treated as a long-term goal instead of short-term management. So I hope that makes sense to everyone. And let me give you just a short background on myself. From the early 90s to the early 2000s, I was an entrepreneur. I owned several assisted living homes, and this is where I started to develop my interest in health, because as I watched folks who were in these homes who were starting to really fall apart, and I watched them really get older and sicker, it was really hard on me. And I can remember actually one of my clients actually dying in my arms, and it was very hard on me to the point of I didn't want to do it anymore. And so I was always looking for ways to find better ways, find better answers, just like the gentleman who offered the $1 million. And the second part of my adult life, I spent co-owning health food stores, where I started to learn a lot of information on health. And then finally, when Carin and I got married, we came to Wildwood, where we took a course in health evangelism. So this gave us kind of a background into where we are today. Now, as we get started, right before we talk about the actual diseases, I think it would be important for us to understand what health is. So according to the World Health Organization, health is a state of complete physical, mental, spiritual, and social well-being. And it is not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So you can see just by their definition that they're telling us that health is more than just being sick. our lives should be something that we can go through on a daily basis and enjoy. Which brings us to what exactly is a disease. So our government's definition of a disease reads something like this, that the disease is often referred to as a non-communicable disease, and this usually emerges in the Middle Ages after a long exposure to an unhealthy lifestyle. Did you catch that? After an exposure to unhealthy lifestyle. Now, in their definition, they actually bring out three things: the use of tobacco, inactivity, and diets high in saturated fats and sugars and salts. In other words, diets that are typified by the Western diet that both the United States and Canada share. But I find it interesting, the very last line in this says this. It says that the risk factors are frequently undiagnosed. In other words, that there are many people who don't actually even know that they have these diseases. They don't even know if they have the risk factors. And it goes on to say that they are inadequately managed in our healthcare facilities. In other words, they don't have the answers. They try medication, and medication is important, especially when you are having an acute attack. But the problem is that, you know, when you go long-term with medication, it is going to have some side effects. So I hope that gives us just a short and brief understanding of health and what disease actually is. So now let's actually go into our presentation. And we're going to start with high blood pressure. Can you imagine having a life-threatening disease and you don't even know that you have it? Well, high blood pressure is also known as the silent killer, and the statistics are staggering. In 1980, there were roughly around the world 600 million people that had hypertension. And in the year 2008, which was just a little over a decade ago, it rose to nearly 1 billion. That is a 51% increase in just a little over 20 years. It's terribly, terribly on the rise. And in fact, they tell us that in North America alone, it is estimated that 1 out of 3 people have hypertension. I was trying to look to see if I can find it. It looks like we have 30 people roughly in this presentation on Zoom. I don't know how many are on YouTube. But if we just take that number of 30, that means roughly 10 in this room may have hypertension. And I hope that's not the case. I hope that we're caring for ourselves. But you can see the ramifications. And this is why that we know that almost everywhere we go, that we will find people that are suffering with these illnesses. Now, hypertension really doesn't care anything about who you are. It doesn't matter your socioeconomic status. It doesn't matter whether you're white or you're black. It doesn't matter if you're yellow or green. It doesn't care even if you're young, because we are finding that more and more hypertension is actually on the rise, even in our young people. And interestingly enough, 50% of the people that have high blood pressure, they don't even know. And now that's pretty sad. So if we take back to 2008, and you have 1 billion people that have, 1 million people, that's 1 out of 7 in the world, by the way, at that time. But if you were to take just that number from 2008, which it has grown since then that would mean almost 500,000 people didn't even know that they even have high blood pressure. Now you say, is this really important? Well, I believe it is. You know, People that have their first heart attack, 70% of those who have their first heart attack have, guess what, hypertension. And even a higher number is having a stroke. 80% of those who have their first stroke also have hypertension. Hypertension affects many of our internal organs, and it affects them with an irreversible damage. It affects our kidneys, the pancreas, our retinas in our eyes, and many other of our organs in our bodies. But this is an irreversible damage, and you don't even know that it's even a problem. But my question for you here right now is do you have high blood pressure? Are you in that 50% of the people that may not even know whether or not you have high blood pressure or not? Let's start by simply looking at what exactly is high blood pressure. Well, blood pressure is the measurement of pressure in the artery walls. Now, there are two numbers for blood pressure. The first one, which is called systolic, is a number that when your heart beats, that is the pressure that will be against the wall of your artery. And then your second number, which is your diastolic number, which is usually a lower number, obviously, because it is the measurement of pressure between the artery wall when your heart is at rest. So when your heart's pumping, you get lots of pressure in there, and then it releases the pressure as the heart isn't beating. So here's some numbers on blood pressure. I need to move my screen just a little bit so I can see my numbers here. So there's 4 different basic levels of blood pressure. Now there's a low blood pressure, and that's where your systolic is 90 or less, and your diastolic is 60 or less. So people will say, well, what if I have low blood pressure? Well, most people don't suffer with low blood pressure. But if you're one of the few that do, if there are no side effects from the low blood pressure, then there shouldn't be any issue. But but if you are having some issues with low blood pressure, then you may want to have that checked out from a physician. So normal blood pressure. Normal is usually with your systolic 120 or less, and your diastolic less than 80. And of course, as you get elevated, you can see the numbers there. When you get up to 130 over 89, that becomes an issue. Then when you get into high blood pressure, again, these are critical. I remember one time we were doing a health expo in New Jersey, and we actually had someone who was in the critical level of high blood pressure. And what do you think we did for this gentleman? We called an ambulance so that he could get immediate medical help. So the question is then, what causes hypertension? Well, nearly 90% of hypertension is simply related to our lifestyle habits. When we talk about obesity, this is one of the first things you think about for someone who is struggling with hypertension. But did you realize that for every pound of weight that you carry, your heart has to pump through an extra mile of blood vessels? So for this reason, people that are 20% more are overweight, they are 5 times more likely to have hypertension than people of normal weight. High salt or sodium intake. You know, around the world where salt is not so prevalent as it is in the Western diet, the amounts of people that have it are very low. But with our Western diet, what we found is that most people, and by the way, a teaspoon is the recommended amount of sodium that we should get a day. But for most people, we get 2 teaspoons or more, which would be over twice as much of salt as we should be getting. Smoking, this should be fairly obvious, but here's the thing. Did you know that for every cigarette that somebody smokes, it raises their high blood pressure, their hypertension, for about 30 minutes. So therefore, a person who smokes a pack of cigarettes a day has blood pressure problems usually about most of the day. So this is something very simple you can imagine that you could share with your friends, that if they have an issue with smoking and they have an issue with blood pressure, then this is something that would be very, very beneficial for them to stop smoking. Caffeine. Caffeine is the #1 abused drug in the world. And oftentimes we associate it with caffeinated soft drinks and coffee and tea. And as you can see from the chart, obviously that is a problem. But did you know that dark chocolate, and I don't really want to harp too far down this road because I don't want to make any enemies, but dark chocolate has almost as much caffeine as Coca-Cola products. So I just wanted you to be aware. See, in this presentation, we just want to give information and knowledge because knowledge is power. Plugged arteries are cholesterol. Plaque cholesterol is also another reason that you would have high blood pressure. As you can imagine, when the arteries narrow, it makes it harder for the water to go through. Now, I have a pressure washer here at the house, and so it has different nozzles on it. And so one of the nozzle holes are very large on it. And so when I go to do that, I can just kind of like spray everywhere, and it just kind of makes like a nice mist. But I have one that's got just a very, very small opening in it. And when I put that nozzle on, I can cut concrete with it. So when you narrow and you apply pressure behind it, it's going to have a higher amount of pressure that goes through. Physical inactivity. This is more than ever something that's really becoming prevalent in our society. You know, we have devices that keep us busy most of the day. And, you know, devices can be used for good intentions, but we still need physical exercise. Back in the early 1900s, almost everybody had a garden and they were out and they were physically working. That's how they fed themselves. But today we find ourselves in a very busy and hectic society. And sometimes we just say, well, we just don't have time to do any physical activity. Well, I like the way that this cartoon shares with us about physical inactivity. The doctor asks his client, he says, what fits your schedule better? Is it better to exercise an hour a day or be in bed dead 24 hours a day? And of course, obviously the answer for most of us would be, well, I think we'd rather have our 24 hours a day and maybe just apply a little bit of exercise. So the question is, what can we do to help hypertension? We've seen some of the causes, but what can we do to help hypertension? Well, of course, one of the first things that you think of is medications. And medications may be our first line of defense, especially when we have a very, very high attack of hypertension. But there are many things to medications. And I will tell you that once you start using medications for hypertension, you will find that the hypertension doesn't simply go away. It actually continues on. You're just suppressing the symptoms. So the thing is that medications don't cure hypertension, and neither do they continue to help you. In fact, the side effects most oftentimes have even more harmful effects on your body than even the medication itself. So my question is there something better? You know, a number of major scientific studies have shown that comprehensive lifestyle approaches to hypertension can give superior results without potential side effects. And in most cases, hypertension can be reversed in just a matter of weeks without drugs by simply making some of these changes. Here are some of the changes that they have discovered that were helpful. We talked about overweight. Well, obviously, in that case, if we were to lose weight, it just makes good common sense that the blood pressure would simply follow and go down as well. Now, we talked about salt. Salt is a very interesting topic, and we could spend more time than we actually have here just simply on salt itself. But my first thought on this would be to change the salt that you have. If you are using a basic table salt, you will find that it has been stripped totally of its minerals and its nutrition. Therefore, the only thing left in table salt is when they reintroduce iodine to it. So there is really not many health benefits, and we don't have time to go into all of the information on it. But I will tell you that Himalayan pink salt is one that I would highly recommend considering a change for. And the reason is because it contains 84 of the trace minerals that our bodies need, as well as that it is still mined thousands of feet below the ground, therefore giving it the best opportunity to be pure in its content. And secondly, obviously, if 2 teaspoons of sodium is too much, then we should try to reduce our salt intake. Now, sodium is sodium. Therefore, if you have a teaspoon of salt, it's still a teaspoon of salt. However, and I know this is a minimum change, if you take a teaspoon of Himalayan pink salt, which also has trace minerals, there will actually be less sodium in that 1 teaspoon. But it's only because that there are trace minerals, because salt is still salt. But what are some of the things that we can do to reduce our salt intake? I found this to be very interesting. The bulk of our sodium intake from the Western diet is through processed foods, canned foods, boxed foods, fast foods. These are the foods that contain the most amount of sodium. If you look at your screen, you'll see that at the table, we only add about 6 to 7% of the sodium. And of course, there's some naturally occurring, and then we add a little bit during when we cook. It's interesting about sodium. I remember as a child growing up, and I was just telling this to Carin today, that it didn't matter what my mother put on the table, I added salt to it even before I tasted it. I was so addicted to salt. And as I have progressed now in my walk, now it's very rarely will I even have salt on the table. If I have a food that has no sodium in it, for example, like a baked potato that I had for lunch today, then I will add a little bit of salt to it. But I don't no longer have that desire that I used to for the high amount of salt. And it's interesting because now I actually get to taste more of the flavor of the foods. And studies have shown us that by simply reducing our sodium intake by 2 grams a day, those millions of people with just a mild hypertension could normalize their blood pressure. Now that's good news. That's not a lot of hard work. 2 grams a day can help cut your hypertension, especially if you are having just a minimal amount of hypertension. We talked about caffeine. We should avoid caffeine because it constricts the arteries. And again, it is something that we often intake and don't even realize that we're, either eating it or drinking it. I'd like to tell you a little story about caffeine. In 1948, a pharmacologist by the name of Peter Witt was doing some research, and he was doing research on spiders. And he found that the spiders started doing their webs somewhere between 2 and 5 in the morning. And so this kind of got Mr. Witt a little aggravated. I'm sure if I was woke up somewhere between 2 and 5, I'd be a little aggravated too. So he decided to do a caffeine test on the spiders. And by the way, let me back up just a bit here. We understand that the spider oftentimes gets his food when it gets trapped on the spider web, correct? So what happened to these spiders when they were given a decent amount of caffeine? Now, he had done a small amount of caffeine initially, and it talked about how they altered their walking and stuff like that. But when he gave them a decent amount of caffeine, their spider webs turned out to look something like this. Now, I don't know about you, but if I was a spider and I was looking for something to eat, I might be going hungry that day. So just another reason that we may want to consider not taking too much caffeine. Also, alcohol. Did you know that when you drink 3 glasses of alcohol, that it keeps your blood pressure up 2 to 4 millimeters of mercury in your diastolic and 2 milligrams in your diastolic? If I said that incorrect, I meant the systolic goes up 2 to 4 milligrams and the diastolic goes up 4. So, but the thing is that if you continue to drink and become a heavy drinker, this actually can lead to long-lasting problems for hypertension. So we talked about smoking. Obviously, if someone is smoking and they're struggling with hypertension, the more that they could cut out on smoking, the better their hypertension is going to be. Also, a diet low in fat and yet high in fiber. This can actually change your blood pressure by 10%. Get this now, 10%, even without weight loss or salt restriction. So a diet low in fat will go a long ways in helping to cut your hypertension. I hope we're seeing that there are many different things that we can do to help with hypertension. But the thing is that the more we do, the more we'll see benefits. So my suggestion would be to eat an abundance of natural foods full of fiber, such as carrots and whole fruits, not drinking juices, because in juice, it takes out the fiber. But we need that fiber, and we need foods that have less sodium. And finally, I'd like to talk about exercise. Studies have shown us that exercising as little as 1 day a week, that's not a lot, is as effective or even more so than pharmacotherapy for reducing mortality for those with hypertension. Furthermore, of major exercise and drug trials shown statistically that there's no statistically detectable difference between exercise and drug interventions in mortality outcomes for coronary heart disease, prediabetes, and physical activity interventions were actually more effective for the secondary prevention of stroke mortality. And for this reason, many institutions recommend for hypertension exercise. And in fact, and just one I'd just like to point out, since we're in Canada, the Canadian Hypertension Education Program also recommends exercise on this level and as a part of this study. Okay, that's going to be our program for hypertension. So if you have any questions there, feel free to ask Carin, or we'll fill them after we're done. All right, so our next presentation is going to be on heart disease. Heart disease is the #1 killer around the world. In 2015, over 17 million people, now listen to that figure, 17 million people died from cardiovascular disease. And by the year 2030, which is just creeping around the corner now, it is projected to go to 24 million people. So here are the top 10 global deaths from 2016. And by the way, when I looked at these numbers, these were the latest numbers that I could find. But ischemic heart disease, in and of itself, as you see, took nearly 9.5 million people. So out of the 56.9 million deaths that occurred in 2016, over half of them were due to these top 10 diseases. Now, out of these top 10 diseases, only one, which is road injury, is the only one that we really can't prevent by our lifestyle choices. But just to give you an idea on how large this is, let's talk about the population in New York City for just a moment. The population in New York City in 2016 was a little over 8.5 million people. Now, that is like wiping out the entire city of New York every year just from ischemic heart disease by itself. So you got to ask yourself this question. If there's this many people, and we're talking about all of these numbers, why is it that we don't hear any more about this? I mean, granted, there are a lot of people that are having issues with COVID right now, but the numbers are nowhere near this. And yet that's in the news almost around the clock. So the question is, why don't we hear about this? Why is there no new news? And who's going to be next? Let's look at it this way. By the way, heart disease accounts for 20% of death for people under the age of 65. It's just a massive, massive problem. Can you imagine when a jumbo jet airliner crashes and 200 to 300 people die? That's big news, is it not? I mean, it will be on the news for weeks on end, and we will want to know what exactly happened. But you can hardly imagine. Heart disease by itself takes out nearly 6 jumbo jets worth of people each and every day. Nearly 2,150 people are dying daily from heart disease. It is a huge problem. I know that either you or some of your friends are struggling with it. So again, why is there no news about this? Why do we not hear? The problem is that it has become so common that we think of heart disease as just a normal way of life. But there's nothing normal about dying, and there's nothing normal about heart disease. Heart disease is something that should not be. But the problem is that for many people with heart disease, their very first symptom is death. This is nothing to play with. It's very serious. and it can come just as suddenly as an airplane crash. But there is some good news. In the US alone, many doctors suggest that 27% of the deaths from heart disease and stroke are preventable. Now, that's pretty good news, isn't it? Because again, that's 1 in 3. So if you took that number, that would mean about 3 million people out of the 9 million wouldn't suffer from heart disease or from a stroke. But the better news is that many researchers are now discovering that 90% of people with heart disease should be able to not suffer from the disease. In other words, 9 out of 10. So if we had 9 million people, let's just say we had 10 million, only 1 million would be dealing with the heart disease instead of 10 million. That's a huge number. That's a lot of lives, a lot of families that are affected. So what do we need to do? How do we get to this 90% number that we were talking about? Well, the first step in conquering heart disease is we should understand what causes it. You see, heart disease usually develops silently over many years when vital arteries that supply oxygen and blood to the heart become narrow and hardened. And in fact, a simple way to explain this is kind of like old rusty pipes. You know, eventually these old pipes are going to get clogged up. But you see, while this is very common, this disease is not normal. Because you see, in countries where people don't partake of the Western diet, you'll find that very few people, in fact, it is 37% versus 88% in countries with a high income. In other words, from low income countries to high income countries, there's 51% difference. So the question is it possible that our Western culture lifestyle plays a big part? Did you know that even in teenagers, 50% of them are now showing signs of cholesterol plaque in their arteries? And by the time we get to 40, our arteries are now almost halfway plugged. Now, that's not good news, and it's not common. It's not the way it should be. So what exactly is a heart attack? Well, a heart attack is when a complete blockage of one of the coronary arteries occurs, and that part that's feeding of the heart muscle actually dies. So what should we do when someone's having a heart attack? Well, it's not the time to worry with somebody's lifestyle at this point. This is a point again where we need to get someone immediately to the hospital. They need to get to a physician who can help them, because there are preventative programs that they have that oftentimes can be very helpful for someone who is struggling with a heart attack. And you know, there are some symptoms, obviously, for having a heart attack. You may feel like some pressure in your chest, or shortness of breath, some sweating or cold sweat. And you may even feel a sense of doom or fatigue or even dizziness. So who is at risk really for having a heart attack? Is it you? Is it your spouse or someone that you love? And the question is, how can we know? Well, here are some risk factors that we can look at and identify. And in fact, we're going to go over 9 risk factors that are well known to be contributors to heart disease. The first one is smoking. About 10% of all cardiovascular deaths are due to smoking. So we've seen how it affected hypertension. Now we see it again as a culprit here. Obviously, you're going to find a theme that if someone is smoking, that this is going to be very hard on their system. Now, there is some good news here. Even for those who have had a heart attack, if they will stop smoking, that gives them now a 50% chance or higher of not having a second heart attack. So if you have someone that you know and love who is struggling with cigarettes, you know, please find some way to try to encourage them, you know, talk and use reason and rationale. The second one that I'd like to talk about, of course, is high blood pressure. You see, even small increases of blood pressure will significantly increase your risk of heart disease. In one study, each time that the blood pressure rose 20 points in the systolic and 10 points on the diastolic, the risk for heart disease doubled. Did you get that doubled? And that it starts from a blood pressure as low as 115 over 75. So if you're someone who has good blood pressure, but all of a sudden your blood pressure starts to rise and elevate to where you would, and this scenario would be 135 over 85, that means that you have a much higher risk now of having a heart attack. And in many cases, an elevated blood pressure can be corrected, again, by just simple lifestyle changes, as we talked about earlier. All right, the third one is high cholesterol. 1/3 of all heart disease is caused by blood cholesterol. In other words, where we're having this plaque build up into our arteries. And that claims nearly 2.6 million deaths each year. That's an extremely high number. And so we got to find ways to help get rid of cholesterol. As you can see, the United States and Canada kind of go neck and neck with, unfortunately, USA winning this battle just by a little bit of cholesterol. Japan has like one of the lowest amounts of cholesterol, while Finland was known to have very, very high amounts of cholesterol. So we discovered that what can we do, and is there something from Finland that can help? Well, yes, Finland did a lifestyle program involving 30,000 people. Now, the women win well on this one because what they discovered is that women had nearly 70% less heart disease simply by adding in a better lifestyle, and men still had over 50% better opportunity of not having a heart attack by improving their lifestyle. Now, in this study, they also found, though, that men came out on top of this, that we actually gained 7 years of life simply by changing our lifestyle. And the ladies actually, in their study, gained 6 years. Well, how would you like to add 7 years to your life or 6 years to your life? You know, as we start to get into our middle ages, and this is obviously where we're coming from, you know, we start to think about our children and our grandchildren. Are we going to be there for them? And I'll bet your bottom dollar that most of us want to be around to see these guys grow up and to be a part of their lives. And so simply by changing their lifestyle, the study in Finland shows unequivocally that this is working. Now, Dr. T. Colin Campbell is a professor emeritus for Cornell University. I don't know if you're familiar with his work or not, but he wrote the book, The China Study, and he's done the most exhaustive study on plant-based nutrition and its benefits for people. His studies went for 20 years, and they were conducted in 65 countries, and they followed 6,500 people. And what he discovered was that with over 360 variables, that he gained over 850 positive traits from eating a whole food plant-based diet. And Dr. Campbell says this: evidence suggests that even eating small amounts of animal-based foods is linked to many individuals to significantly higher rates of cardiovascular disease. So we find that when we eat meats, that it is extremely challenging for those of us who want to live longer. Now, it is interesting because cholesterol is only found in two places. Cholesterol is found in humans and it's found in animals. So therefore, if you're eating on a plant or you're eating a nut, if you're eating fruits or vegetables, if you're eating a loaf of bread, there is no cholesterol in those products. So if you're struggling with a cholesterol issue, just remember that it's either genetics or it's from the meats and the animal products that you're eating, because there is no other source for cholesterol. Excessive weight. You should strive again to achieve your ideal weight. You know, we've known for many years that being overweight is a risk factor for heart disease. But actually, science is now showing us that by the time you get to your middle ages, that by being overweight, it actually increases your opportunity of having a heart attack by 60%. So we should also try to get good regular exercise. You know, if you spent just 2.5 hours of moderate physical activity each week, they have found that this would lower your risk for heart disease by around 30%. Now, this was good news for me because Carin and I just decided that we were going to start biking just like these guys are doing here. And we're just now getting started, just a few weeks into this. But I don't remember exactly, but I believe Carin got in like a little close to 40 miles last week. So we're starting to build, and I can tell you that we're seeing our endurance pick up. We're seeing a lot of healthy benefits other than even just the amount of lowered opportunity of a heart disease. Alcohol. Alcohol is a significant risk factor in heart disease. Simply stated, it just damages the heart muscle. Saturated fats. We need to reduce the amount of saturated fats that we have in our diet. Again, studies have shown that saturated fats raise the blood cholesterol even more so than dietary cholesterol. These are primarily found, again, in animal products, especially red meat, lard, butter, and cheese. Again, saturated fats are extremely hard. They're extremely taxing on the body. Stress. Stress is another one of these things. There's just not enough to say about stress. Of course, what the studies show us is that when you've had a stressful event, that many times that there will be a heart attack within 1 to 2 hours after having this trigger point. But stress affects everything, every disease we have, and it affects them all in a very, very negative light. And the ninth and final one that we're going to talk about is diabetes. You should try to seek and control your diabetes, because the rate of diabetes causing a heart attack causes it to be 2 to 3 times higher than if you do not have diabetes. Now, I'm going to talk about this a little bit more when we get into diabetes, but it's very important to make sure that you don't have diabetes, because it's going to affect, again, your heart disease in a very, very negative way.
Hey, Ron, could I step in here real quick and ask whether this might be a good place to do questions and answers for the first two, or would you like to do those all at the end?
Let's hold off until the end, because there may be some answers that are in the third presentation that may help for the questions.
Okay, please go ahead.
Now, Pastor, do we need to take a minute or two for a break or something like that? Because we've been sitting for quite some time, or are we good to go forward?
It might be a good idea to take a few minutes break, I think. Let's take 2 to 3 minutes. And we'll be back here at 3:44, 3:45, please. Thank you.
Okay. And by the way, now that we are taking a break, I will, while we're doing a break, I will try to see if we can answer some questions here.
Could I ask a question, please?
Sure.
I suffer with high blood pressure, and my doctors prescribed 1, 2, 3, about 3 or 4 different tablets. And every time I take them, they make me, what happens to me is that I walk a stagger around the place like as if I'm high on drugs, and I end up being a danger to myself and the people on the road. And even though I tell them that this is what happens to me, that my head, I get really lightheaded and can't control myself that well, that they keep telling me I should still take them because my blood pressure is really high. What do you suggest that I should? I used to take, as a result, I stopped taking the blood pressure pills, and I started juicing beetroot, carrots, and celery, and that was, it was working for a while. Then I stopped for some reason. You do the same thing over and over again, and I get fed up with it. What do you suggest I do?
Well, my suggestion would be fairly simple. First off, I would tell you that you should understand that your doctors work for you. And most doctors do not have a background or a degree in nutrition. So mostly what their patients want is a quick fix or medication. Now, I would never, ever recommend to someone to just simply go off their medication. I think that actually can be very dangerous and very harmful. But you should, at best possible, engage your physician and say, listen, these aren't working. I need to work with some alternatives. And so what you should say to your doctor would be something along these lines. Obviously, you know, you want to make sure that your health and your safety is first and foremost. But say, listen, doctor, why don't we try lowering one of these medications, and I will start working on a lifestyle change. You should actually start to work your lifestyle change prior to actually going in, because what's going to happen is that if he starts to lower that dose, and then your hypertension goes up and is elevated, then he's going to say, see, it's not working for you. Long term, I don't recommend doing juicing anyway, and Karen's going to say the same thing for long term, because the problem with juicing is it's a high concentration of sugar in your system without any fiber. And in all of these, we find that for long-term effects, you're going to need fiber in your body because it helps to pull out the toxins. We're going to talk about a little bit about fiber in the next presentation. But I would recommend, again, a full lifestyle change. Find the areas that we discussed that you're weak in, and build those up. So for example, if you're not exercising enough weekly, that would be a great place to start. And it looks like we're about close to starting back time again.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Please go ahead, Ron.
Okay. So since we're talking about diabetes at this point, and of course we're at the end, this is a great segue to go into talking about diabetes. Before I get into diabetes though, I just like to say that, you know, the things that we're talking about in here are very simple in nature, and yet we that they're very hard to do. It's oftentimes not the easiest thing to go out on a rainy afternoon and go for a walk. If you like McDonald's French fries, it's hard to pass by McDonald's and not get your French fries. So there are things that we do, and sometimes subconsciously we don't even realize this. So and back to is it Diana?
Yeah.
Yes, I would also say that we need to take time to form good habits. Good habits will help us in our lifestyle. And I would also say start with 1 or 2 items so that you don't overwhelm yourself all at one time. You build yourself up. And remember, you're attempting to make a lifestyle change. This is something that won't just simply stop as you get well. In other words, if your blood pressure is high and you start exercising and your blood pressure goes down, guess what? You're going to need to continue to walk, because when you stop walking, the blood pressure is going to have a tendency to go back up again. So it's this way with a lot of the illnesses and diseases. So it's my recommendation that we try to form good habits, do them 1 or 2 at a time, find a buddy, somebody who can do this. Let's make them fun and make them, listen, I've made a lot of lifestyle changes over my life. And I remember the last one was over French fries. I mentioned the McDonald's French fries. I was like, because they're deep fried, they're actually carcinogenic. And I'm like, I don't want to give up my fries. I've given up meat and I've given up cheese. And I'm like, you know, this is challenging. But as time has gone by, I have learned that there are ways to do things differently. And so we can find ways and find people that will help us in this walk of ours. Find a buddy that you can connect with, and someone who maybe has already been able to overcome a particular obstacle that you're working with, and work with this person and share with them and encourage one another and lift each other up. Because here's the bottom line. Oftentimes we view lifestyle as bondage, but I'm going to tell you lifestyle is actually freedom. The bondage is the illnesses and diseases that we have due directly to our lifestyle. Now, it is, before we start diabetes, that there is a genetic component to most people. But what I would tell you is, and what Carin and I have found at the Lifestyle Center that we've been a part of for several years and seen many, many miracles, what we have found is that people who take this seriously, who follow a lifestyle choice many times are reversing. I'm seeing these statistical numbers aren't statistics to me. These are people. You see, we are finding that people are living longer, that they're living healthier, and that makes them happier. And we'll talk a little bit about that right at the closing as well. But since you mentioned that, I just thought I would share that as well. So let's talk a little bit about diabetes. So what exactly is diabetes? Well, diabetes is a disease that occurs when the body becomes unable to handle glucose, which is sugar, that builds up to dangerous levels in the bloodstream. And over time, these high blood sugar levels are very taxing on your body, and they result in a dramatic increase in the death and disability. Now, there are two types of diabetes. The first type of diabetes is it's called type 1. Now, this is an insulin-independent illness, and it affects about 5 to 10% of all diabetics. Now, this is not a lifestyle disease. This is actually is a different type of disease altogether. Therefore, that's really not part of our discussion today. But I will tell you that lifestyle even helps with insulin dependent. But once you're insulin dependent, very rare, and I mean very rare, is it that you're ever going to change, because when you're insulin dependent, what that really means is that simply you're dependent, and your body is not producing, whether it be enough or any insulin to balance out these sugars that are in the bloodstream. So again, this is not where we're going to spend the bulk of our time in this presentation. We're going to talk more about type 2 diabetes, which is the rest of the diabetes cases, and it's 90 to 95% of the diabetics. Now, type 2 diabetes is where you have an insulin blockage. And what this means is that you don't have a shortness of insulin in your body. What you have is something that is blocking that insulin so that it does not do its job properly. So let's look at the components of the blood sugar. We've talked about insulin. Insulin is a hormone that is needed to convert your sugar or glucose and starches and other foods into energy. In other words, insulin is kind of like a key that opens the door. You see, your insulin and your glucose needs to get into the cell. And so imagine this door being the doorway into your cell. But the key is of no avail. It is no good to you. It's useless if the door is locked shut. Do you follow what I'm saying? In other words, what we're told oftentimes with blood sugar issues is that this is always just a sugar issue and that you're just getting too much of it. But we're going to talk about today a different way in which the key of insulin is to be helpful in your blood sugar. So glucose is actually what your body uses for food, for fuel. Now, think about it this way. You've heard it said, what you put in is what you get. If you have a really high dollar car, are you going to go put the cheap gas in it? More than likely, you probably will not. I don't know if he's even on here, but Darcy, he's got a picture of a real nice sports car on his Facebook page. And I'm sitting there thinking, man, if we had this car, of course it'd be his, obviously, but to have this car, I'm pretty sure he's going to put premium fuel in it. He's not going to put the cheap ethanol stuff in that. He's going to want the good grade stuff. Well, it should be the same way for our bodies. What we put into our body is the fuel. So think of it that way. Now, in type 2 diabetes, we mentioned that we have glucose and insulin. So in this diagram, the first picture shows you what we should be seeing when the glucose and the insulin merge together. You can see that they penetrate through the walls of the arteries and they go to now to where they're supposed to be working with. The problem is when you have type 2 diabetes, is that they're not getting through the surface and they're staying in your bloodstream. And that's causing your whole bloodstream to be taxed with both insulin and glucose, which it doesn't need. And so therefore it throws in a very negative effect on the body. But did you know about diabetes that about 25% of the people who have diabetes are undiagnosed? When Carin and I were in India, we had the opportunity to do blood sugars on many hundreds of people. And what we found was that about 50% of the folks in India, especially in the cities, did not know that they had blood sugar issues. Also, 1 out of 3 people actually are pre-diabetic, and they just really don't know about it. But there are warning signs for the roughly 29 million people in the United States. You got that number correct, 29 million with diabetes. So 1/4 of those don't even know that they have diabetes. Is that a huge number? What are some of the warning signs that we can think of when we think of diabetes? Well, I think that's fairly simple. There's 3 of them that come to my mind straight off the top of my head. Excessive thirst. If you're always finding yourself needing something to drink and you can never quite quench that thirst, you may want to check and see if you're struggling with diabetes. Also, if you have frequent urination, this would also be another sign. And of course, excessive appetite. We find oftentimes that those who are diabetic are usually a little bit overweight because guess what? They have an excessive appetite. So if you like to eat just a little bit more than you should, again, maybe if you don't know, you should get yourself checked to see if you're struggling with diabetes. But this is where we're going to take a turn. Again, when you're talking to most doctors about diabetes, they're going to talk to you about your sugar intake. Today, we're going to take a turn and talk about fat. Because what happens is when you eat something that has fat in it, the cell actually kind of gets encompassed by this fat. And so therefore the insulin that's trying to get into that cell, that key, it can't unlock it because there is something there. Remember, we heard that there was something there that was keeping the insulin from going in. Well, that we find out is usually fat in our diets. Many studies have shown now that fat in the body is far more serious than sugar. Now, when we talk about eating sugar, I think it's important to understand, we talked about this just a little bit a few moments ago when we talked about juicing. When you juice fruits and vegetables, you're getting obviously more nutrition, but the payoff for that is that you're getting higher amounts of sugar and you're getting zero or very little fiber when you juice. Therefore, it makes it more complicated, and that will cause obviously your blood sugar to rise, especially if you have a fat that's keeping the sugar out of the cells and leaving it in the bloodstream. So to make this simple, what can we do to disarm diabetes? I want you to listen here. Many studies suggest that a comprehensive lifestyle approach is the best defense against getting diabetes. Many diabetics can normalize their blood sugars often within a matter of weeks by adopting a minimal lifestyle program. Now, when I say that, Carin and I, we have been blessed to be a part of a lifestyle center that evolves around helping people to change their lifestyle. And so we many times see when people come in with diabetes, we have seen people come in to the lifestyle center with insulin pumps and leave just a few weeks later, no longer using the insulin pump. We have seen many people come into the lifestyle center who have diabetes that have neuropathy in their feet. And as they're leaving, they're starting to feel the neuropathy leaving and getting feeling back into their feet. You have to understand that these studies are studies, but real people are getting real benefit. So how are they getting this? Well, one of the ways that we're going to do this, obviously, if fat is an issue, eating a low-fat diet will be very beneficial in a role of when you're trying to get the insulin into your system. What are some of the foods that you should replace with your high-fat foods? Well, you should have foods, again, with high fiber. Now, I heard Carin mention chia seeds in her presentation and flax seeds. Chia seeds have by themselves 11 grams of fiber, both soluble and insoluble fibers. In other words, they not only aid in digestion, but they aid in elimination, which is what the two fibers do. So what happens is that actually will take the fat that you're eating, it'll bind it up and pull it out of your system. So fiber is very, very important. You can find it in other things such as whole grain cereals and breads, cooked beans. I know at the Lifestyle Center, many times that they will incorporate beans in some way actually into the breakfast for many of their patients that are working with diabetes. And of course, peas and fruits. Now again, fruits need to be eating as whole fruits, not as juice. If you drink a glass of orange juice and you're struggling with diabetes, you're going to cause your sugar to elevate. But if you eat an orange or an apple, you'll find that many times that is not the case. And the second thing that we can do is exercise. You know, the number one thing that the American Diabetic Association says that we can do is exercise. You know, through regular exercise, the need for insulin injections can often be either reduced or completely eliminated altogether. And what we have found is that regular physical activity enables the sugar to enter the body's cell. Now, I want you to listen to this very closely. Regular physical activity enables the sugar to enter the body's cells even without insulin. Now, you said to me, well, Ron, you just told me that you have to have insulin in order for the sugar to get in. That is correct. You do need insulin. It's interesting because at the Lifestyle Center, they always do what they call, after they eat a meal, a digestive walk. And I understood for years and years that this digestive walk was to aid, obviously, in their digestion. But it wasn't until last year when Carin and I were in Texas that we met, and this is going to be extremely interesting if you've never heard of this. Dr. Errol Bryce shared this message to me, and it became oh so clear. When you exercise, there is a hormone called GLUT4. GLUT4 stands for glucose transporter. In other words, it's the sugar transporter number 4. Now, there are 12 GLUT transporters, but in this study, GLUT4 is what was the differing factor. But what happens is that GLUT4 is only activated, guess what? When we exercise. So if you eat a meal and you're diabetic and you're having an issue with your insulin, simply going for a walk after you eat will help curve that high or that low spike that you get from the sugar. And the reason is because of GLUT4. I want to share with you a very simple diagram here. So if you see the red blood vessel there, that's your bloodstream. And you can see that your blood sugar or your glucose, excuse me, is flowing down to where the insulin is. Now, so what should happen is when you're healthy is that it's going to go tag up with your insulin. The insulin receptor is going to act like the key, and then it's going to be able to go down into your cell, where there it's going to be distributed into this transporter called GLUT4. And the simple way of saying this is that it goes and it takes the glucose to where it needs to go to within the cell. So what happens is that when you exercise and after you eat, when you exercise, the GLUT4 actually rises to the top of your cell and can actually pick up, even without the insulin, the glucose from your bloodstream and pull it down into the cell. And so it can then transport it to it where it needs to go, like it normally does. When I first heard this, I thought, this is something extremely beautiful. This is something that people need to be made aware of, because we're sitting here and we're struggling with a disease that we really don't need to be struggling with when we're talking about type 2 diabetes. If you will simply exercise after you walk, this will make many of the problems that you have go away. Now, it's not the end all be all, but it will definitely help curb that spike. So when you do the two together, when you eat a diet that is low in fat and high in fiber, and you exercise, you will see, like the many people that I have seen, be free from this disease called diabetes. Again, affecting up to nearly 30 million people. So now I'd like to bring this home a little bit more personal. That was the presentation part. I invited my dad to be on. I don't know if he actually was able to get on or not. He said he's had a hard time with Zoom, and I sent him a thing. But my dad at 94 still loves to get on the computer and stuff like that. This is a picture of my mom and my dad. And this was taken when Carin and I lived in New Jersey. I want to tell you a story about my mom. My mom, growing up, didn't have any issues with diabetes, but like most people, when she got to her early 60s, she started developing diabetes. And it continued to get worse, and it got worse, and it got worse. Well, one day she received a letter from the doctor, and she shared it obviously with me and my dad. And what this doctor said, what this letter said was, Miss Lynch, your A1C, which is your 3-month reading of your blood sugar level, your A1C is 9.7, and you're taking the most amount of insulin that we feel is safe for you to take. Well, your A1C should be way down in your 5 range. So it was almost twice as high as it should be, and she was taking insulin. So like the guy in the original story where he puts up the $1 million and says, listen, find me a fix. Well, this is kind of the spot my mom's in. But it just so happened about that time that our church had a program, and it was called CHIP. I don't know if any of you have heard of it or familiar with it or not, but it's a program put out by Dr. Hans Dill. And this program is very similar in what I'm talking about. And in effect, it is a lifestyle change. So my mom, realizing, because the letter had stated to her, Miss Lynch, our next step, we're probably going to be looking at amputations for you. So, like I said, she got serious about this and she decided, and she had a lifestyle change. Well, within 6 months of her lifestyle change, within 6 months, her A1C was 5.6, and she was no longer on any medications. So my mom, pretty much in all aspects, she was not even pre-diabetic at this point, which starts at 5.7. So the thing is that we've seen the change. And of course, the feeling came back in her feet and she started living life again. But I want to tell you the rest of the story. This is why these lectures are so important to me. So my mom decided, now we're from the South, and folks in the South, I can't speak for everywhere, but in the Southern United States, if the United States has bad health, dietary issues, the South would be the king of those bad health standards. My mom was raised on a high-fat diet. She really enjoyed her fried chicken, her biscuits and gravy, macaroni and cheese, and this sort of thing. Now, by the way, just for you to know, since she enjoyed these foods, and I was raised on these foods, guess what foods I naturally like? I like these high-fat foods, just like my mother liked, okay? But here's the thing. Here's the sad part of the story. Mom decided after a couple more years that she wanted to go back to her old lifestyle. In other words, she fell back out of having a wholesome lifestyle back to her old regime. Now, within 2 years of this, my mom not only went back to being diabetic, but she also was so severe that she ended up on dialysis, which is where most folks who have diabetes at the end of the run will end up. And she was on dialysis for about 2 years. And she was actually at dialysis, and she had a massive heart attack, and she died. She died a couple of days later, obviously in the hospital, not there in the actual unit that she was in doing her program. But here's where I'm going with this. Number one, do you think that my mom had the right to make a choice for herself and her lifestyle? And the only answer that I can come up with is, yes, she does. We each and every one of us have the opportunity to choose which way we're going to go. And that's why at the beginning I says, this is a choice. This isn't the chance. We're going to choose in the direction that we're going to go. Well, the thing about it is, though, is that while you do have the choice, as my wife would tell me when I do something and get in trouble, which I may get in trouble for saying that, but when we do things, there are consequences to our actions. So, number one, do you think that I miss my mother? Of course I miss my mother. You would miss your mother or your loved one. Secondly, and probably more importantly than me, what about my dad, who's now 94, who wishes that she was still around? Listen, at his age, he needs a little bit more help now. She was about 9 years younger than him. So, number two, it affected him. But also, listen, we're in a religious setting here, so I'll just go ahead and throw this out here. I believe it also affects God. And the reason I say that is because we serve a God that I believe wants us to be healthy. He wants us to be happy. This is his desire for us. This is why he wants us to do these things so much, because he desires to be with us and for us to be healthy and happy. Now, the reason that I say that is because guess what? Like everybody else, my family has other people in it who are struggling with diabetes. What kind of testimony would it have been if she continued in her lifestyle so that she could share with others that good news? You see, I see that as a missed opportunity, and that's kind of sad. Now, I bring this back to me because guess what? Remember I told you, I like the same things that my mom liked. Guess which road I would be headed down? But you see, I found a better way. I know she had the better way. So now at this point, I say to myself, Ron, what do you want to do? Do you want to go down that path, or do you want to do the best that you can and live life the fullest that you can? And that's where I'm at. And I want to share with people because I want them to not experience that pain and that sorrow that many people that are suffering with these illnesses have to go through. And for most people, it is very, very senseless. So anyway, I just wanted to share in that little short testimony on that. And in closing, I would like to say this. What? Know ye not that your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost, which is in you, which ye have of God, and ye are not of your own, for ye are bought with a price. Therefore, glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. This is found in 1 Corinthians 6, 19 to 20. And that is the end of our presentation for this evening. And if we want to open up for a few questions now, maybe, Carin, could you actually maybe come join me in here and we could, so I hear she's typing her last question. So, but anyhow, that's our presentation. So if we have any questions or whatever, we'll do what we can to field the answers.
Thank you so much, Ron. Really great information. Challenges all of us, I think, at some point in terms of our practice, in terms of our choices. We'll open it up now for questions. I know many of you have already asked questions, and Carin has done her best to get to most of those. If you'd like to ask a question here to Ron, please go ahead and do so now.
Do you have a question, hon?
I was going to ask, what is the difference between being pre-diabetic and being diabetic?
Okay, I hear Carin from the other room saying that she just answered that question. Carin, would you like to put your mic on and just make it for the room? I'm trying to expand so I can see the whole room now, because I couldn't see anybody. It was very challenging. It's really hard. Are you able to get on and answer that, Carin?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I can't see me. That's why I can't find me on the thing. I was going to pull my screen up to unmute. But the difference between pre-diabetes and diabetes really has to do with how high your sugar level is. Now, what they do is they think that if a sugar level, and again, sometimes these numbers change after more research, but as a standard rule, if you have sugars that are over 100, okay, a fasting blood sugar is basically before eating, it's you know, like in the early morning where you haven't had any food, it's testing your blood sugar at that level. A fasting blood sugar of 100 or higher indicates a pre-diabetic stage, which means you're moving toward the fact that your insulin is not getting into the cells in your body quick enough or enough to actually make, you know, to open up the key to let the sugar be used and out of the bloodstream. So the problem is that if you get too high, which is usually about 120 on a fasting blood sugar, some doctors will actually say 110, but they say between 110 and 120, then you are being considered diabetic. And there's also a range where if your blood sugars postprandial, meaning that you have sugar levels after you've eaten, range in a high range and don't drop at normal rates, then you will be considered diabetic. So that's basically, I'm not a medical professional, so I don't want to get too technical because I want to make sure I'm saying the right thing, but that's the difference of the diabetes to regular diabetes.
Carin, can
Yes.
you convert that to the measurements used in Canada? You talked about 100, 120. I have figures in like 5.6 is good.
Oh, is that okay?
So
Is that you're talking about an
7 is
A1? Are you
yeah.
talking about an A1C? The blood, I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, yes, that's right.
Sugar. So, and the A1C basically takes an average of your sugar for over the course of, I think, 3 months, if I'm not mistaken.
Mhm.
And I think, Ron, can you just tell me, it's 5.9 is considered diabetic? Am I right on that?
You know, I don't know the exact number on that. I know that pre-diabetic starts at 5.7.
Yes. So 5.6 or less, you're not in the pre-diabetes range. Pre-diabetes starts at 5.6. And I think 5.9 is the range where it would be where you're considered diabetic. And that's a blood test that they take. It's not just a finger prick. So.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So
Thank you.
So there's a question on here from Yvette. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. It says, what should you do if you have type 2 diabetes and hypertension and cholesterol, and the doctor suggests Lipitor and metformin, saying that you'll have a heart attack or stroke by the time you're age 51? You know, I struggled with this with my mom because this is what the doctor told her. And they said, well, you got this problem and this problem and this problem. And actually with my mom, it continued out. There was obesity and some other underlying issues as well there too. And at the time, my thought process was, this is so complicated, nobody could ever figure this out. But when you look at these three, when you look at diabetes, hypertension, and heart disease, you'll notice that they are all a lifestyle disease. Therefore, you should be able to treat most of these with lifestyle. Now, when your doctor is talking about putting you on medications such as metformin, which is for diabetes, and Lipitor, which is for your cholesterol, I don't think that you should ever go specifically against your doctor. But again, because obviously your levels are high. So you need to find what balance, and you need to allow your physician to know what you're attempting to do, because let's take diabetes for the first part of this question. When you have diabetes and you take metformin and you start to do a lifestyle change, what you will find is that your both of those are going to drive down your diabetes numbers, making them better. But the problem is lifestyle will regulate and balance and make everything even. But metformin or the medication will continue to drive them down. So therefore you could end up in a diabetic coma or something to this nature. So it's very important that you are very proactive in your own assessment of your disease. Therefore, you need to be checking your blood sugars on a very regular basis. And, you know, when you start to drop below, I would say take the metformin while you're taking your, like your doctor's prescribed, watch your levels, tell your doctor what you're doing. And when you get to a certain point, you have to make a decision at this point. Am I going to continue with lifestyle, or am I going to, because you can't continue to take the metformin and the lifestyle because it will drive it too far down. Therefore, you must find that balance. It may be as simple as, for example, if you're taking a certain dosage of metformin to, well, let's say maybe you're taking it 3 times a day, to maybe taking that twice a day or once a day. But it should go down in stages and basically weaning yourself off. But again, it's very important for your physician to know and to be in this cycle, in this loop, or otherwise he thinks this medication is doing it all by itself. It's very important to and keep yourself documented. When you go in and say, listen, doc, this is what I'm doing. These are the exercises I'm doing. But you have to, after every meal, you need to be checking your sugar. By the way, metformin has some awful side effects. My mom was on it. I won't go into it on here, but I can tell you that they were very awful side effects. Same with Lipitor. I've had many people come into my store with Lipitor and complaining to me about how their hands hurt because the Lipitor was very hard on them for arthritis. But again, your doctor is right. If you don't do something, you're going to have a problem. All he is trained in, though, is allopathic medicine. He doesn't understand lifestyle and what it does. But the same principle applies. You must tell your physician that this is what I'm doing. And on your cholesterol, you're not doing them every 5 minutes like you are with your blood sugar, but you want to keep those monitored and keep things adjusted. And as you are getting healthier, again, to minimize off, that's the goal, is to minimize off of these medications. Does that help answer the question?
Yes. Yes. Earlier on you spoke about juicing. You said you take a lot of condensed sugar in juicing. So is it not recommended then to juice? Or you can juice for a certain period of time?
Carin, this is your spot.
All right, I'm sorry, I had to remove a kitten off my head. So one of the things I like to tell people is I think that juicing, a lot of times people feel like, I've seen people say, I'm going on this 20-day juice fast, or I'm doing this for a cleanse. I think in short, there's a few ways to look at it. I think for a long-term time period, I don't think juicing is necessarily strict juicing, meaning that that's what you do as your meal, is definitely a good thing. And the reason why is because, again, we talked about briefly about removing all the fiber. See, God has packaged fruit and vegetables in a perfect package. And so what happens is we get a balance of the phytochemicals and the fiber and the nutrients and all of that the way God had made them. However, when we remove something such as the fiber, when we do juicing, yes, we can get it into our system in high concentrations, but we're getting a high concentration of everything, including the sugars and things like that. So it's not necessarily balanced. I think when we have an acute issue that we need to address, juicing can be very beneficial, but it would be, what are you juicing? You know, how much are you juicing? I don't necessarily agree on juicing as a long-term cleanse. I think if somebody wanted to do a cleanse 2 days maybe or so would be, maybe 3 days at the most would be, I think, sufficient to cleanse. But I don't, and again, for medicinal purposes, if you incorporate juicing to get those phytochemicals and those antioxidants in your body, in a very fast way, it gets absorbed through the small intestines very rapidly, then I think that that is a good thing. Juice like out of the bottle, such as like grape juice or orange juice, I think that we really need to limit that in very small quantities, and also very, you know, that once in a blue moon type of thing, because of the fact that we're getting so much sugar and stuff like that. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, yes.
Good.
Thank you.
Just, this is a short question. Yolanda asked, is it reversible type 1 and type 2 diabetes? I did mention this, but the short answer is no. Again, type 1 diabetes is where your body is not producing either enough or any insulin. Therefore, I mean, it has happened that people have reverse type 1 diabetes, but normally no. Type 1 diabetes is usually not a lifestyle caused problem.
Actually, I just want to add, you can reduce your need for insulin by lifestyle change, meaning you can reduce how much insulin you're taking as a type 1 diabetic. But the reversal, because the pancreas many times is just not functioning at all. So, but you can, with lifestyle change as a type 1 diabetic, reduce your need for insulin, your amount of insulin, not your need. You're going to need it always to live. But you can absolutely reverse type 2 diabetes. It is, I've witnessed it over and over and over and over again the last 4 years of our time at the Lifestyle Center at Wildwood.
Along with heart disease and hypertension, along with other lifestyle diseases. These are just a few of them that we just talked about today.
Are there any other questions for Ron and
Yes.
Carin?
I have been told, and I'm not sure if it's true, so you can tell me yes or no, that drinking either warm or room temperature water at night before you go to bed, that it reduces the heart attack and stuff like that. Is that true, or is that another housewife's tale?
That it reduces what?
It reduces having heart attacks and stuff like that. That's what I've heard. So I want to know if it's true.
Well,
or is it another housewife's tale?
Yes, it is true. Water, good water is essential in our bodies. I don't know that it necessarily needs to be a nighttime, especially for, how do I say this nicely? Those of us who are starting to age a little bit, and that might keep us up a little bit more in the evening. I would actually tell you that the best time to drink start your water would be early in the morning, and room temperature is actually better than cold water. Carin can address that if she wants to. But since our bodies are made of about 60% water, and actually our brain's up to 85% water, we have a lot of water. But what water does in this particular case is water moves the toxins out of the system. So if you're eating foods, let's just say that you're in a diet that has high fat in it, water won't by itself, but it'll do what it can to get fat out of the system. Obviously, if it has fiber as well, those two things will really help to move things out of the system. So yes, water is very good, but water is part of a lifestyle change.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I'll carry on then.
If there are no other questions, I'll take the opportunity here to express our gratitude and appreciation to Ron and Carin Lynch for their ministry here to us this afternoon. Life-changing information. One of my favorite passages of scripture is found in John chapter 13, verse 17. Christ says, if you know these things, happy are you, or blessed are you if you do them. The blessing is not in knowing, it's in applying, it's in doing the things that we learn. And you've given us a range of things for us to consider and to pick up, and by God's grace to apply. Thank you so much for your ministry. We pray that God will continue to bless your work as you continue this this life-changing ministry, both in the U.S. and internationally. The Richmond Church will be sending a donation to support the ministry of the Gospel Mission, the Gospel Medical Missionaries in the UK, as well as to support Ron and Carin's ministry. If you'd like to add to that donation, to have us combine it with yours, please feel free to touch base with me. I'll get you in touch with our treasurer, Ken, so we can facilitate that process. If you'd like to offer separate donations, that's okay too. Let me know, or touch base with Ron and Carin. They can give you direct sort of information for how you can do that. If you'd like to do that for the group that ministered to us in the morning, please let me know as well, or let Sister Cynthia know, and we can get you in touch with them. They do really good work. Let's support this good work so that others can benefit from it as well.
Amen.
Yes.
On that note, Pastor, one of the things I feel is very relevant here is that part of sharing here is remembering we know people, you work with people, you have family members, you have people that are struggling here. These are simple, practical things that don't harm people. Therefore, you can say, listen, give this a shot, give this a try. I'll give you a good example. He was talking about water. A couple of days ago, my knees were hurting, and